the NBA playoffs are about to begin, and with that, we have a great matchup coming up in the first round between the Philadelphia 76ers and the Toronto Raptors. These two teams match up very well, and we're likely in for a great series with these two teams playing in the first round of the playoffs. So then the question arises, who will win this series? Will it be the Philadelphia 76ers led by Joel Embiid and James Harden, or will it be the Toronto Raptors, who are a very surprising and up-and-coming team led by head coach Nick Nurse and all-star caliber players Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam? Well, in this video we're going to be previewing this entire first round series and giving our official playoff predictions of who will win this series. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So the first point I want to make about this series is talking about the star power of both these teams. So obviously the Philadelphia 76ers have the clear edge in that sense, with Joel Embiid and James Harden on their roster. Now, the Toronto Raptors have some stars in their own rights, such as Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet. But the Sixers clearly have the far and away best, most talented player in this entire series, which is Joel Embiid. So I expect him to be clearly the best player in this series. And then they also have James Harden, who's an interesting player to talk about, as this could be one of the potential keys for the Sixers winning this series, because James Harden is going to have to step up in this series. He needs to be the Philadelphia 76ers' second best player behind Joel Embiid. And James Harden has struggled recently coming down the stretch of the season after a really fast start after being traded to the Philadelphia 76ers. So we're going to need James Harden to be able to step up in this series in order for the Sixers to have a chance of beating the Raptors, because if he plays like he has the past 10 games, it's going to be difficult for the Sixers to win the series. But if we get James Harden from almost directly after the trade, those first 5 to 7 games potentially, it's going to be a lot easier for the Sixers. Now, looking at the Raptors, they have obviously Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet who made the All-Star team this year, and Pascal Siakam, who has been an All-Star in the past and has been a very good player, especially down the stretch of this season, helping lead the Raptors to a very hot stretch leading towards the end of the season. But the Raptors' star power, again, does not compare to the star power of the Philadelphia 76ers. And that's one of the biggest advantages that the Sixers have going into this series, is that star power tends to help teams win in this league, and the Sixers definitely have the edge in that aspect. So moving into the next point I want to make is talking about the Raptors' strengths also equaling the Philadelphia 76ers' weaknesses. The Raptors are really good at a lot of things that the Sixers aren't very good at. So for example, the Raptors are second in the league in offensive rebounding, while the Sixers very much struggle at just getting rebounds in general. They're towards the bottom of the league in that category. So that's something that the Raptors have a big advantage in. Another is that their turnover differential is the best in the league, and this is something that the Sixers are going to have to watch out for, because the Raptors are going to be able to force turnovers. They're also very good getting out on the fast break, which also the Sixers struggle at playing defense in transition. So the Raptors definitely have some strengths that correlate to the Philadelphia 76ers' weaknesses, which is a big advantage for the Toronto Raptors, as they're going to be able to use these things to their advantage and be able to expose the Sixers in those specific areas. Before we continue this video, I just want to say that if you do enjoy videos like this, consider subscribing to the channel for more videos just like this. And without further ado, let's continue with the videos. Another thing I want to talk about is Matisse Thybulle. Obviously, he will be absent in the series for games 3 and 4 and 6 if that game is needed, as he is not eligible to play in Toronto. And that's a big disadvantage for the Sixers, as he is their best perimeter defender, and he's going to be needed to help slow down some of the Raptors' perimeter players, such as Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, players like that. He's going to need to be able to make an impact on the defensive side of the ball, guarding them and potentially forcing turnovers. And he's not going to be there for all the road games in this series for the Sixers, so that's a big advantage for the Raptors. So one of the biggest talking points, I think, of this series is talking about the coaching of both these teams, more specifically Doc Rivers versus Nick Nurse. I think that Nick Nurse is far and away the better coach than Doc Rivers at this point. Some of the things that I want to talk about: for Doc Rivers to have a successful series, he needs to have good rotations. He can't have all bench lineups like he did last year in the playoffs versus the Hawks that ended up costing the Sixers. He needs to be able to recognize when a player is playing well and leave them in the game and help them continue to be successful in what they're doing. Or if a player is playing bad and shooting maybe 1 for 8 from 3, then he needs to be able to recognize that they're not playing well and pull them out of the game, as they're doing nothing but hurting your team at that point. That's something Doc needs to recognize, and that also correlates directly to some of these blown leads that he's had in the playoffs before. We cannot have blown leads on the Sixers side for the Sixers to win this series. There can be no blown leads in this series. That's something the Sixers have struggled with all year. I believe they're second in the NBA in most blown leads when leading by 15 points, and that's something the Sixers are going to need to work on. Last year, they lost to the Atlanta Hawks because they blew big leads in games 4 and 5, and that can completely turn a series around, and we cannot have that moving into this series. That can correlate to the rotations, and he also just needs to be able to make good in-game adjustments, which is something he's also struggled with recently and in the playoffs in the past. That all correlates to the blown leads, and he needs to be able to fix that so that the same thing does not happen this year in this first round playoff series. And he also needs to go to what's working on offense, and he needs to be able to run good clutch time offense in close games. The Sixers have struggled closing games down the stretch of this season, and a lot of it's because he resorts to a lot of ISOs that don't really end up working, but something that really works most of the time is Harden and Embiid, their pick and roll game. It's pretty much unstoppable, and Doc Rivers tends to go away from it for some reason. He needs to recognize what works and be able to run those sets in crunch time and be able to get buckets as the game is winding down in order for the Sixers to close out some of these closer games that I expect moving into this first round playoff series. On Nick Nurse and the Raptors side, Nick Nurse is one of the best coaches in the entire league. His in-game adjustments are great. His game planning is great. He always has a good game plan, and he's going to throw different looks defensively and offensively at the Sixers, and the Sixers are going to need to be able to adjust to that. They're going to come into this series, and they're going to try to make other players besides Joel Embiid and James Harden beat them. As we saw in 2019 playoffs, Nick Nurse threw a ton of double and triple teams at Joel Embiid, and it's just gotten worse as we've progressed through the years, as Embiid has gotten better, and Nick Nurse has keyed in on him more during the regular season matchups between the Sixers and the Raptors. Nick Nurse is going to try to get the ball out of Joel Embiid's hands. Now, I still expect Embiid to be able to put up big numbers in this series because of his continued offensive improvement throughout his career, and especially this year leading the NBA in scoring, dealing with doubles and triples all the time. But Nick Nurse is so good at throwing different looks at Joel Embiid, being able to bring the double from different angles, and Joel Embiid's going to need to be able to make the right read. And Nick Nurse is also going to throw a ton of doubles at James Harden, so he doesn't want the two stars to be able to dictate what happens. So that's something to look for in this series, is Nick Nurse trying to get the ball out of the stars' hands. And other players for the Sixers are going to need to step up. For example, Tyrese Maxey must be aggressive. He needs to have the ball. First of all, that's something else that Doc has to have. He can't just resort to corner duty, sitting in the corner watching Harden ISO at the top of the key, for example. But Tyrese Maxey is going to have to be aggressive in this series and have the ball, driving to the rim, attacking, pulling up for three. He was the third best three-point shooter in the league this season in terms of percentage. So Tyrese Maxey, obviously, he's not afraid of the moment. He's very capable of scoring the basketball. And I believe that there will be at least one game in this series when Tyrese Maxey has it going, and the Sixers are going to need to stick with him. And I think that that Tyrese Maxey can actually win the Sixers a game or two in these playoffs, in this playoff series, if he's given the opportunity to, because we've seen in the past, in big moments, Tyrese Maxey comes through. We saw it last year in the playoffs versus the Hawks. We've seen it this regular season when Joel Embiid and James Harden were not playing. Tyrese Maxey is very capable of doing that. So if he has it going, the Sixers are going to need to stick with him. Again, Tobias Harris, what version of him will we get? In my opinion, for the Sixers to be successful going into this series, Tobias Harris is going to be a big key for them. He's going to have to be able to hit his open three-point shots and stay aggressive on offense. Him hitting the open threes helps open up the spacing for players like Embiid, for Harden. Harden, obviously being the great passer he is, he's going to be able to find Tobias open for three, and Tobias has to be able to knock his open shots down, and he's got to stay aggressive on offense as well. Like I said with Tyrese Maxey, they can't just have him sitting in the corner, not really doing anything, watching other players dribble. He's going to have to be involved on offense as well. And then the other players, such as Danny Green, George Niang, Shake Milton, they must knock down their open shots, whether that's a three-point shot or their opportunities that they get with the basketball. They're going to have to be able to knock down their open shots as well. And one final thing I want to talk about when it comes to the Sixers rotations and other players is they're going to need good backup center minutes, whether that's from Paul Reed or DeAndre Jordan. We don't know, because Doc Rivers is very stubborn and he wants to be able to, he believes that DeAndre Jordan can still give the Sixers good minutes when most other Sixers fans wouldn't see it that way. I think Paul Reed in this series is the way to go, as he is very much more athletic. He hustles, he's younger, and he's more hungry than DeAndre Jordan is. And he can kind of match that intensity that the Raptors bring. And they're going to need to be able to get more rebounds in this series, as again, like I said, one of the Raptors' strengths is offensive rebounding. Paul Reed can definitely come in for a few minutes and grab some rebounds and get some good hustle plays and play some good defense. So now here it is, my official prediction for this first round series between the Sixers and the Raptors. This is a very evenly matched series. I think it's going to be one of the very best series in the entire first round of the playoffs. I do have the Philadelphia 76ers winning in 6 or 7 games. I think it's going to be tough, a close series. It's going to be back and forth. There's going to be a lot of close games, but I think the Sixers in the end will prevail. They have the star power, like I mentioned. Joel Embiid, I think, will put up great numbers, as I believe he should be the MVP this season. He's been dominant no matter who he's played against. Even against the Raptors, he's averaged around 30 points per game this season, and that's typically the team that gives him some problems. So I believe Joel Embiid is going to come through in this series, and he will be one of the main reasons the Sixers get the win. Another reason, I think James Harden's going to come out at least in these first couple games and play very, very well. We saw after he had a couple weeks off, after he got traded to the Sixers, he came out and put up great numbers in his first couple games with the Sixers, and I think we'll see a similar thing here, as James Harden knows this is the time that he's got to play his best basketball. He wants to win a championship, and he's had a week off coming into this first round of the playoffs. So I think he's going to come out and play well in these first few games especially. And I think Tyrese Maxey will also have a big impact in this series. Like I said, he's not afraid of the moment. I think he will be aggressive going into these playoffs, and he will have a couple games scoring over 20 points and knocking down some three-point shots that will be a big help to the Sixers winning a couple of these games. Again, I think the star power outweighs the young, athletic, talented players of the Raptors. They're a great team, young up-and-coming team, and they definitely have a bright future, but I think the Sixers will get this win most likely in 6 games. So that's pretty much all I got for this video. If you want to get hyped for the upcoming Sixers playoff run, you can go watch my Sixers hype video that I just released. I'll make sure to put that on the screen, and subscribe to the channel for more Sixers and Eagles videos, and drop a like down below to help support the content and push this video out to other people. And that's pretty much all I got for this video. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.